Hello, my friends. So today I'm here at Black Mesa Research Facility to talk physics with you. I'm going to be reading my new Substack article, Jewish versus German Physics, Part 1. And just before I get into the reading, which, by the way, I'm only going to read up to the paywall because I hope that you will once again subscribe. Every subscription that I get really helps out. It helps to justify putting in the time and effort to produce this content. And I really appreciate your support. It means a lot. And so yeah, I'm only going to be reading up to the paywall. This is a long article. There are going to be more parts that will come out, as you'll see. I mention what's going to come in this article. So yeah, and before I get into reading, I wanted to address one possible criticism that I would anticipate, which I've already gotten from a couple people, which is the idea that I'm criticizing modern physics solely on the basis of it being a quote unquote Jewish science, that this is just pure anti-Semitism or something like that. It's not. Okay, I'm criticizing modern physics on the basis of it being irrational. And I'm explaining that irrationality by in reference to the fact that it has Jewish mysticism at its core, and that the forefathers of modern physics are predominantly Jewish, and that their Jewish spirit, their Jewish mystical ideas, really helped to inform the development of the physical interpretations of quantum mechanics and general relativity and mathematical physics as a whole. And so that the core of the criticism is that it's irrational. The fact that it's influenced heavily by Jewish mysticism and that it ties in with leftist ideology is a very interesting aspect of it, and I hope that that fact that it is heavily influenced by Jewish mysticism and that it dovetails with and logically supports leftist ideology, I hope that those facts get you to at least begin to question, begin to doubt, and begin to look at the fundamental irrationalities of modern physical theories and interpretations of reality. But really at the core of it is that it's irrational. That's my argument. And I know that physics, for a lot of people who consider themselves intellectuals, who consider themselves highly educated, physics is one of those sacred cows. A lot of people pride themselves on memorizing the tenets of quantum and relativity, and it really makes somebody feel big-brained when they're able to spout off these ideas. But so I know that it rubs a lot of people the wrong way when I come at an entire field like modern physics. But I hope you'll take the time to listen to the entire article, consider the whole argument, and don't try to strawman me by saying, oh, I'm just attacking it because it's Jewish, because that's not what I'm doing. So without any further introduction, I'm going to here read for you this article. And once again, please consider subscribing. So let me just switch here the display. Get my mug out of the way here. And I will begin reading. Jewish versus German Physics, Part 1. Introduction. Of all the conceivable branches of knowledge or fields of science, surely physics is the most objective, the most concrete, the most impervious to bias and politicization. Right? Unfortunately, as I have stressed before, all fields of study have been infiltrated and warped to conveniently align with and reinforce the worldview and political agenda of the ruling elite, and theoretical physics is no different. What is now called classical physics is a completely legitimate discipline built on rational understandings of physical mechanisms, but the physical interpretations of fundamental reality which underpin what is known as mathematical physics, e.g., relativity and quantum, were invented by a predominantly Jewish group of intellectuals with entirely irrational and dogmatic Jewish assumptions at their core. As stated by the Nobel Prize-winning German physicist Johann Stark in his famous 1938 article in Nature magazine, quote, "The manner in which physical research is carried out and described depends on the spirit and character of the men of science engaged upon it, and this spirit and character differ individually, as do men, nations, and races." This was well known to a group of renowned German physicists in the early part of the 20th century who wrote extensively on the differences between what they identified as Jewish physics versus German physics. Obviously today, Jewish physics has won out, thanks to the victory of the Jews in World War II and their ongoing extensive pop science propaganda campaign, and the view that most educated people have on the nature of reality has been deeply informed by their irrational assumptions and explanations. However, it behooves people like us, rational thinking white men and women, to rethink those explanations, understand why their fundamental theories of nature are irrational, and dispel the illusion that Mother Nature herself supports their ludicrous political agenda. The focus of the first part of this article will be to show how mathematical physics, abbreviated math-phys from here on out, is used as an axiom to logically support the profound insanities of the leftist agenda, as well as establish the fact that fundamental ideas of math-phys parallel Jewish mysticism, thanks to the field's predominantly Jewish paternity. After that, I will delve into the less sensational, but equally important, methodology of math-phys, using Johann Stark's work as a guide. Later, in Part 2, we will examine particular elements of their not-so-scientific method, and how they are represented in particular theories, such as wave-particle duality, black holes, dark matter, the Big Bang, etc., to show how they are irrational, dogmatic, and fundamentally at odds with the basic principles of understanding itself. Such irrational dogmatism was fully recognized in the early 1900s by Stark and his contemporary German physicists. But the full flowering of the irrationality that we see today was unforeseeable and would likely baffle them in the extreme. Finally, I will offer a short reference guide to a small but formidable group of rational scientists and the explanations of physical reality and philosophy of science they have developed. Physics and leftist ideology. Here's a lovely image of this man on BBC. What quantum physics taught me about queer identity. Presumably, the Jewish fathers of quantum and relativity, Einstein, Bohr, Born, etc., did not themselves anticipate the extent to which their interpretations of nature would be used to validate the madness of modern leftism. Nevertheless, in hindsight, it is plain that their theories provided a basis from which many elements of leftism could logically unfold. The defining image of quantum reality is a ceaselessly churning ocean of chaotic, unpredictable, irrationally behaving particles, which have no clearly defined boundaries, shape, location, or rational mechanics to them. The way that these subatomic particles behave has completely defied the standard fixed rules and formula that we think govern the universe, whereas classical physics treated particles like discrete, definite objects. Quantum physics shows us that the idea of a particle being a fixed, quote, thing is a construct. The particles of quantum, quote, like shape-shifting scoundrels, can often change their behavior on being observed by a human, to alter their dynamics suddenly when we're no longer observing them. According to this view, the very laws of nature, quote, always remain open to study and review. Quotes in that paragraph came from a Newsweek article. Indeed, in the quantum view, which is now the predominant view of science and reality itself, all of the basic elements of leftist politics are present. The stodgy, old, traditional view that, quote, standard fixed rules and formulae govern the universe, and by extension society, is utterly defied by modern scientific progress. Thanks to this enlightened perspective, we've come to find that change is the only constant, and this chaotic, shifting fog must be embraced because it corresponds with the very fabric of reality. This break with classical principles teaches us the important lesson that fixed things are mere hubristic constructs. All boundaries, borders, categories, and definitions are fuzzy and blurred down to the basic building blocks of matter. Why, then, would we embrace a social reality that contradicts that? All of the rigid traditions of the old order must be cast aside thanks to this new understanding, including, of course, the social order. Quote, the conservative fight to divide human beings by their race or assigned biological sex, on a scientific level, belies the very foundation of the natural order that they are so hell-bent on preserving. If even the lines between fundamental particles are blurred, how then could we justify drawing lines between categories like race and sex? Thanks to science, we know now that fundamentally everything blurs together in a chaotic haze. Obviously, we must affirm the existence and total equality of every brave, non-binary, queer BIPOC in the world. This is doubly confirmed by the subjective nature of reality under quantum. The observer is placed front and center in this mode of science, and our subjective states of mind directly alter the nature of fundamental reality. It only makes sense that if fundamental particles change and morph on the basis of our subjective states of mind, so too should our identities and social realities. According to their view, reality doesn't even exist unless it is observed. Subjectivity gains the hand over objectivity, and we can make the world as we will. As I said, I doubt Einstein or Bohr would have foreseen the extent to which this logic would have been applied, but the logic of it cannot be denied. I think if Einstein lived today, after some schooling from his fellow academics, he too would affirm these leftist mantras. Here I include a trust the experts little image here with a couple quotes from the experts. I think I can safely say that nobody understands quantum mechanics, says Richard Feynman. If quantum mechanics hasn't profoundly shocked you, you haven't understood it yet, says Niels Bohr. And Roger Penrose adds, quantum mechanics makes absolutely no sense. More fundamentally, this assault on basic, rational principles of understanding has the effect of paralyzing the intellect for most people. It undermines our intelligence in general and sets up a caste of elite, mathemagicians who must interpret the word of nature for us dumb, illiterate peasants. They commune with forces far out of our reckoning, and we must simply listen and nod with reverence to the almighty PhDs. Us mortals can only take their word for it and stand in awe before their mystical auras. This is the perception of most people of the great scientists of our age. And for the few who do feel capable of understanding, we are only led to the ideas described above, that understanding means not understanding, that everything is blurry, no answers or clear explanations are even possible, and that is true wisdom. But I am here to tell you that that's all a damned con. Rational understanding is possible. Clear boundaries do exist, and reality does abide by fixed rational principles, from the most fundamental elementary objects to the macro-social world we interact with daily. Our classical understanding is legitimate, and categories like race, sex, etc. are entirely real. To hell with the anti-principles of Jewish science. I am not the first to criticize this dogmatic Jewish science, as mentioned above. Prior to World War II, a flourishing community of German physicists made similar attacks upon their Jewish counterparts. Let us now turn to the critiques of Johann Stark and really begin to pick apart the principles of math phys in detail, and examine particular instances where their irrational methods have been applied to see exactly how they are irrational and why we ought to reject them. Sorry, my son is crying in the background, but believe me, my wife is taking care of him, so I'm not just abandoning my poor, sweet little infant. Math phys, a Jewish doctrine. Quote, "This picture of quantum physics strikingly parallels the Torah perspective," says Gedaliah Schaefer at Chabad.org. Before delving into Stark's critique of dogmatic physics and how it applies to modern math phys, let us briefly establish the fact that modern mathematical physics is of distinctly Jewish character, born of predominantly Jewish fathers, as unquestionably indicated by the following statistics. And we end here on a cliffhanger. Keep reading with a 7-day free trial. Subscribe to Germ Illustrated to keep reading this post and get 7 days of free access to the full post archives. I hope you fellas will subscribe. The following, what comes after is an explanation of how the fundamental ideas of quantum and relativity parallel Jewish mysticism, the statistics of how important Jewish physicists were to the creation of modern mathematical physics in the 20th century, and finally we get into the actual meat and potatoes of the critique that Johann Stark gives of what he calls dogmatic Jewish physics, and just generally speaking, how they proceed in an essentially unscientific way in creating the interpretations of physical reality that they've come up with. And once again, I want to stress for people who are true believers in physics, I am not doubting that the math works as a description. I am not doubting that they are able to use certain formula to come up with accurate predictions, that technology has developed in concert with some of these mathematical formula and mathematical descriptions, and that the math is important. What I'm doubting is the actual interpretations, the physical interpretations that they come up with, the theories of how reality really is and how it really works at the atomic scale. And that critique is also further explained later in this article. And honestly, it kind of hurts me to stop here because following this is the real interesting bit to me. The real philosophy of science is beyond this paywall, and maybe at some point in time in the future I'm going to make it free, because it's more important to me, honestly, to just get these ideas out there and have conversations about it. But for now, it's going to remain behind the paywall to help encourage you guys to get a subscription. I hope you will, because the more people subscribe, like I've already said, the more people subscribe, the more time I can actually devote to doing this. I would love to, at some point, make this some kind of full-time or part-time job. And, I have 14,000 subscribers now on YouTube. If even 10%, 1,400 of you guys subscribed for $5 a month, I'd be able to quit my job and do content production full-time. So it's kind of a pipe dream, but why not try? Anyway, really appreciate you guys watching, and hope to see you guys again soon. Thank you for watching.